We're talking about the genetic advantage of ADHD. The reason that I want to do this is one, it's just good for our brains to understand like why this is a great thing. There's a lot of advantages in like genetic mutations or evolution that's really helpful around ADHD. And also last week I did ADHD and shame, and I mentioned how I thought it was really helpful when you have shame around ADHD to also understand why your brain is really great, because our society is built for a non-ADHD brain, right? Because that's the majority, because it's only 3 to 8% of us have ADHD, 80% are undiagnosed. And so our world is going to be designed for the majority. It makes sense, and it can make us feel like something's wrong or we're not doing something right, or so many other aspects within that, right? And so let's talk about the genetic advantage, because it really is an advantage in a lot of ways. And some of this goes back to, hunter-gatherer days as well, and like some of the genetics, and it's just a whole fascinating thing. And there's a reason that it exists. And one of my favorite studies they did, and you might have heard me talk about this, is when they studied remote African tribes and villages, because ADHD is primarily genetic. So I'll just start out with that, and then we're going to go into more just as an intro. But they studied different African villages that were remote, right? So some of them had no ADHD within the gene pool at all, and some of them absolutely had a higher prevalence of that. And so they could compare the two, and they were, similar demographics, but isolated. And the ones that had ADHD did way better. They thrived more as a community in a tribe than the ones who didn't, because of the variations of ADHD, right? If there wasn't a genetic advantage, it would be out of the gene pool by this point, as part of the theory. Why we have so many people who still have ADHD? Why are people thriving who have ADHD? It's because it can be an advantage in the right environment. And so the tribes that had ADHD were able to provide food more easily, right? Especially when there was a famine, we had to go hunt. We had to hunt for days and forget what time it is, and maybe kill a lion, right? And we have less, we have a higher tolerance to risk, so that can be easier. We can be more impulsive, but that also makes us more creative. We have 10 times the amount of thoughts as someone else, so we can figure out how to preserve the food, right? We can have some sleep stuff, or light sleeper sometimes, or issues with that, and so we could stay awake at night. We might want to sleep during the day or sleep in the morning, but we could be a little bit more hypervigilant because we have more sensitive nervous systems. And so there's so many things in ADHD that really are a genetic advantage, and that is what we're going to deep dive into today. Again, if ADHD was purely dysfunctional, why would our genes keep existing at such a high rate across humanity? So the thing to understand is that ADHD traits have survived for thousands of years across almost every population on Earth, right? And when you see a pattern like that, when you look at genetics and biology, the pattern is it suggests that these traits have advantages, sometimes really big advantages in certain environments, or we wouldn't see the prevalence of this. And so again, there are things that are hard with ADHD, and it can be debilitating. And understanding the traits we have that helped our ancestors survive, innovate, lead, explore, right? Do you think people that are volunteering to get on a ship and have no idea where they're going to land, and they might die, but they want to explore something new because they're bored, do you think those people didn't have ADHD? Like, there's going to be some in there, right? Like, who else can be like, yeah, let me leave my family and get on the ship to try to explore and find a new continent, or just like drift off into the sea and die? Like, no, you've got to have some adventure in you. You've got to have some quest for newness. You've got to have like maybe you're bored, right? And so ADHD really is a difference in our nervous system. It's, like I said, it's highly genetic. It can be a lot about our dopamine and serotonin and norepinephrine, and how our neurochemicals are regulated. And we have interest-based nervous systems, right? So that's why you might have energy for something you're interested in and just feel completely frozen for something that doesn't feel new or challenging or interesting, or like a passion where the brain's just literally not giving you dopamine. Like, there's no motivation, no matter how much you beat yourself up. So we have an interest-based nervous system. Genetics, what they say is that if you have ADHD, there's a 50% chance your parent has ADHD. There's a 50% chance your kid's going to have an ADHD. And overall, now there are some cases of people who have ADHD where it's not tied to genetics, but that's like, I think, less than 10%. And those are some kind of interesting scenarios, which I'm still doing some research on. So the big thing to understand is that we have lower baseline dopamine activity. We seek novelty. We have a very fast scanner for stimuli, right? We can chase stimulus, or we might need a stimulus break. And we have increased sensitivity to things we're interested in and urgency. So a lot of times our nervous system asks, is this stimulating? Is it urgent? Is it dangerous? Is it meaningful? Is it exciting? Right? Is it stimulating? Is it urgent? Is it dangerous? Is it meaningful? Exciting? Am I passionate about all this? That's kind of what our nervous system asks. And then if the answer is yes, then we have a lot more dopamine, and our nervous system, everything says, okay, let's go for that, you know? So when we look at like back the hunter versus the farmer brain, what they talk about is that the ADHD may represent a little bit more of a hunter kind of cognitive style of processing. And so this was a theory that became famous through Tom Hartman's like hunter versus farmer model, if you've ever heard of that. And so it's kind of imagining those ancient hunter gatherers. And when we look at it, it's like, what traits help survival in our ancestors, right? Hypervigilance, if you have that, scanning environments really rapidly, risk-taking, having high energy bursts, because other people without ADHD, they might have, it kind of might be like this, whereas if you have that, you have like a big sprint, and then like you can't get out of bed, or you need a lot of rest, and a big sprint, and you're really social, and then you need a break. So when we're fed with this consistency, you have to be consistent or you can't be successful, then that feels like a lot of shameful, or maybe it's not helpful, but we're not looking at it the right way, because it is really helpful in a lot of environments, especially hunter-gatherers, or big ideas, or pulling big things off last minute, or doing something in a week that would take 3 months for somebody else. And so we're not going to be consistent in the same way, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. Some other traits that help survival: curiosity, right? A lot of us are very curious. Fast reactions. And that's with that lower impulse control. We actually have faster reactions. Novelty seeking, ability to improvise. That's another thing. Now, if we look to modern industrial society, the things that are helpful a lot of times is being able to sit still, right? Repeat the same tasks over and over again. Be consistent. Sustain focus on low interest work, sometimes mundane stuff. Be able to tolerate routine, the same thing over and over again. Be able to comply with schedules, right? That's what our modern industrial society rewards. And that's what we were like taught in school, or what they wanted from us. And so modern society rewards this kind of low level, boring consistency in a sense. To us, it's boring. Whereas ancient survival often rewarded adaptability. An entrepreneurial world rewards adaptability. So isn't that interesting how we might have a lot of shame about how our brain works, and yet like our ADHD ancestors are probably a good reason like why we're here and why our society is where it is, and why we have tech, and why we have advancements and medical advancements and discoveries in space, and all kinds of stuff. So it's ADHD remains highly global. The USA is not the one with the most prevalence of ADHD. You might hear that, oh, the US, there's actually, and I'm looking at, I think it's Europe actually has the highest prevalence of ADHD. I need to look that up, current numbers, so don't quote me 100% on that. But it's not that we're in the US and we're just handing out this diagnosis, handing out meds. That's not what's going on. The US is not the highest for ADHD diagnosis. That's a total myth. And so again, that question is, with the evolution, like, why would ADHD genes survive? Because it remains prevalent globally. So one, when you're looking at evolution, traits that are purely harmful usually decrease over time, and then ADHD traits that produce survival create advantages. So looking back, ADHD traits consistently reduce survival and reproduction across history. We would expect genes to become rare, right? If it stopped us from surviving and reproducing and thriving, they would start to slowly come out of the gene pool. But that's not what's happening at all. That's not it at all. And so again, when we look at some of these things, exploration, The novelty seeking as a survival advantage, exploration improves survival, right? We're exploring different things. Like I said, I would be blown away if a lot of our early explorers that hopped on ships and went off into the abyss hoping they'd find something. You probably did not just some boring nervous system. You got to be novelty seeking to risk your life for an adventure. And that would be, I mean, really interesting to find out. So exploration really improves everything. Curiosity leads to discovery. A lot of our inventors, Albert Einstein, the smartest man to ever live, they say had ADHD. The inventor of the light bulb, the inventor of your phone, all had ADHD brains. And then high novelty seeking might actually help migration and adaptation. So, and as they say, like if you imagine two tribes, right? One tribe never explores. They're very consistent. They do the same thing all the time, but they're not innovative. They don't take risks. They're not curious about stuff, and they just stay the same, right? Whereas the other tribe has a few high novelty seeking members that are curious, that have higher risk, higher tolerance to risk. You know, they're very curious. They have all these thoughts. They have to stay busy all the time because they get restless. So out of these two tribes, the one that does the same thing all the time, the one with some novelty seekers, which one is going to find new food sources more easily? Which one's going to have some alternative options if there's a famine or the weather changes? Which one might have safer land or better land because they're always seeking and they're always exploring? Better hunting territory. Who's going to be more skilled at approaching danger? Someone that has lower impulse control and can act really quick and assess, or somebody that's a little bit more even keel? Who's going to come up with new technology? Who's going to invent fire and the wheel first? I mean, human survival depended on neurodivergence, right? And like novelty seeking and risk averse and getting bored in current environments. There's another, this is really interesting. There's a gene called the DRD4 gene, and they call it the explorer gene. And it's, again, and this is everybody, not just neurodivergent, but they've linked it highly, the variant, this DRD4, a 7R variant, explorer gene, to ADHD traits. And it's associated with novelty seeking and migration. And this gene is more common in migratory populations. And so what they found is, and this was really fascinating, that the DRD4 explorer gene is related to the dopamine receptor variant. So that's part of what the gene, the dopamine receptor is differently, and it's associated with ADHD traits, seeking novelty, exploratory behavior, migration patterns, and so it doesn't prove ADHD evolved for exploration per se. It says that ADHD traits help humans move, adapt, and survive, and therefore thrive. So it's not like ADHD, I guess, and I'm still looking in this because this isn't my forte, but it doesn't mean like ADHD like evolved just for this, but it could, and they can't prove that for sure. Another one, is anybody kind of hypervigilant or like higher anxiety sometimes? Just like a little bit more aware of your surroundings, more sensitive to sounds or noises or textures or fabrics. Okay, so hypervigilance, if you run a little bit more anxious, hypervigilance in dangerous environments was really helpful. So we notice environmental changes a lot more rapidly. Our attention can shift really quickly. That can help in danger. We might be constantly scanning as a protective measure. So it's interesting, in our modern society, distractibility is punished, right? And really distractibility is like, we're kind of bored because we can also lock in and nothing can touch our focus if it's interesting enough. So in our society, distractibility is punished, but in certain environments where we're, out in the open, or we're exploring, or we have land that we need to protect, scanning constantly actually saves lives, right? So when you have somebody who's more hypervigilant versus not, who's going to notice a predator first? Who's going to feel a change in the enemy movement, maybe in the sound or just intuitive, right? What about an environmental shift? Or if there is a strange sound that you don't quite recognize. So our nervous systems often prioritize rapid environmental awareness over a sustained narrow focus on things that kind of matter, but not totally. So we're very adaptive under threat. We have a lot of police officers and firefighters and emergency care workers that have ADHD, and they're really, really good at it. I mean, I would love a police officer with ADHD. I know we have some retired, but like, That'd be great. I'd love a surgeon with ADHD because, and my surgeon in the past has, because we get that hyper focus. And think about that. We can think really, really fast if it's a surgeon too, and you get so locked in, you forget what time it is, and you are meticulous and you take your time. And it's been 4 or 5 hours, and we don't care if we ate yet. We don't know what time it is because we're so hyper focused. So it's kind of a brain of extremes. So if you gave me a surgeon with ADHD versus without, I might take the ADHD surgeon probably every time, honestly. So the other thing, impulsivity as a competitive advantage. Anybody struggle with impulse control sometimes, whether it's spending, um, whether it's blurting things out loud? Yeah, yeah, yep, totally. Okay, so yeah, that's a thing. So fast action can outperform overthinking. And yes, some of us can overthink. I can do that, but in the moment, that the lower impulse control, it outperforms overthinking. Risk taking sometimes can really produce massive rewards, and that's entrepreneur. Boldness, right? You might say stuff and it's not as polished, but it actually helps leadership and innovation, and it can make you trustworthy as well. So that impulsivity also, again, it makes us creative. They've done a lot of studies that tie impulsivity to create higher creativity levels, because if you're sitting there trying to think everything through, well, like you're not going to be as impulsive or as creative. So yeah, impulsivity can be great. So again, we might take opportunities others hesitate to take. We might lead um, during like crisis really well. We might act under uncertainty. We might explore dangerous terrain, right? We might challenge social norms. If you've ever like not really understood rules, like why do we have this? Why do we have this rule? It doesn't make sense. And I'm not going to follow. I'm going to do this thing I want to do. And oh my gosh, I shouldn't. Who knows, right? So we challenge social norms. So history actually rewards forms of boldness, and then entrepreneurship. So ADHD, if you have ADHD, you're 500% more likely to be an entrepreneur, which is pretty amazing. We have higher risk tolerance. We have fast idea generation. We're more comfortable with uncertainty because as an entrepreneur, it rewards rapid adaptation, having big vision, high energy, persuasion, creativity, right? And so a lot of entrepreneurs show those strong traits. And us that might struggle with repetitive paperwork, we're going to excel at building momentum, spotting opportunities, energizing people or inspiring people, creating things, innovation. Um, so then speaking of innovation, ADHD and creativity, we can have unusual pattern recognition. So we might associate this thing with this thing if you think in analogies, if your brain works like that. Not everybody, but some of us can really do that. Nonlinear problem solving, divergent thinking. We might have unusual associations or try this thing with this thing. So our minds really think laterally instead of linearly. So we can kind of bop around a little bit and look at stuff like bottom up processing versus just, pragmatic in a certain way. So what it does, it creates unexpected connections. We have creative solutions for problems. We improvise. We have innovative thinking, and we can come up with a lot of solutions rather than this is the rule. This is how we do that, right? So I mean, I'm going to keep going. Do you see? Just can you see how much like amazing things that's from an ADHD brain? It's just fascinating. So hyperfocus. I'm curious who experiences hyperfocus. So when it is something you're interested in, you're passionate, it could be a show, it could be a project, it could be whatever. Who experiences hyperfocus? You lock in and it's like, oh my gosh, I forgot what time it was. I didn't even know I had this appointment, right? Who doesn't? Is there anybody that doesn't experience hyperfocus? I know once in a while I've had somebody say maybe they don't have that, like once in a while. But I think more often than not, we have the hyperfocus. This is the flow state that professional athletes try to get into, right? And we can do that automatically when it's something interesting or we make it interesting. So this flow state. So ADHD is not a deficit of attention. That's not what ADHD is. I know it's attention deficit hyperactive disorder, but it's more of like a regulation of where our attention goes. So it's difficult to regulate our attention when it's not interesting, novel, challenging, part of our passion or regulating, right? And so high interest tasks can produce this incredible focus that nobody can touch, you know? So that's just one of the biggest misconceptions, is that people with ADHD can't focus. No, we can focus 10 times better than a neurotypical person on specific things. If it's not on those specific things, then yeah, we're going to have trouble focusing, but that's because it may not be as interesting. It might not um, trigger our nervous system in the same way. So we have that hyper focus, that flow. So we can really outperform neurotypical peers dramatically with creative projects. In emergencies, if you've ever witnessed a car wreck or a certain emergency that you had to handle, or the pipes were bursting, you knew exactly what to do and you stayed calm. In competition, innovation, in intense learning periods, you have to cram for something that needs to happen, and you can, man, can't believe I got that done by the deadline. That's insane. Whereas the neurotypical person is like, this is too stressful. I'm not even going to touch it. This is too much. I can't do it in the amount of time. I just have to set my limit. We're like, well, let's see what I can do and get it done. Crisis performance, so we're better under urgency. Stress can actually increase our dopamine or norepinephrine temporarily. So we actually thrive under stress sometimes, or pressure. And then a lot of people report calmness in emergencies. I don't know if anybody here experienced that, but when I do big speaking, I mean like big stuff. When I flew into Turkey during like the bombings that were going on, and it was crazy. It was high pressure. I was so calm. I didn't understand. This was years ago, and I didn't understand it, that I felt so calm. Especially when I'm on stage, it's like the more pressure, the calmer I feel. For the most part, it's really interesting. So emergencies, sometimes we can suddenly get clarity, right? Or focus, or get decisiveness, or higher energy. So it's urgency stimulates the neurochemicals that we crave. This is the same reason why you might be doing all this stuff that feels urgent, right? That you know isn't a priority, whether it's a squeaky wheel client that keeps calling you, that, has poor boundaries, or is, just kind of needy, or some kind of issue or whatever. Like, we're more likely to go to stuff that's urgent. And so we do need to watch that, because everything can feel urgent, and then we don't do our lead gen, right? Or we don't do the stuff that we need to do over time because it's not urgent yet, because we gravitate towards that. So it can be a good thing, and we want to watch it. So again, just looking at our modern society, our modern systems reward repetition, routine, delayed gratification, and like a sedentary focus, right? So our modern world was largely designed around industrial efficiency. So schools train sitting still, compliance, repetitive attention, standardized tests. But our ADHD nervous system often thrive in movement, right? Stimulation, autonomy, challenge, novelty, urgency. So a lot of us had trouble in school. And it was not a lack of capability. It wasn't because we're not smart. It's because our environment was a mismatch. It was not designed for our brains. And then you go into school, and then you think something's wrong with you, and you get in trouble, right? So a lot of times classrooms will penalize our ADHD traits. And if you think about like a kid who talks constantly, moves often, can't sit still, interrupts, questions authority, gets bored quickly, daydreams, right? We get treated as problematic because we're not doing what they want us to, because we're talking too much. And why can't we sit still? And you need to pay attention, and don't interrupt. That's rude. And why are you questioning your teacher, right? If the rules don't make sense. And he gets bored quickly. You got to focus. So you think that you're not smart. And then you grow up and you have that story. And we're in school for a long time. So it can form how we see ourselves. And really, it's just so interesting, because if we were in a different environment, right? An environment set for us, those traits would become leadership traits: innovative, right? Exploration, high charisma, entrepreneurship, passionate, curious. Like all of these things, and moving has high energy. Like all this stuff would be rewarded in a different environment than the school, which was set up really, depends on what you believe, but a lot of stuff I've read, it's kind of to help create factory workers. In a sense, like that's what it was kind of training us to do. And whether that was a good or bad intention, that's what it's set up to, is sit there, get a job, go to school, get a job, and you're going to be fine. And you just got to do your job, and then you retire, right? It really didn't set us up for the world we have today. It's really interesting when we look at it. And then we also, what I would say is with emotion dysregulation. So our ADHD can affect our emotional intensity. So fast nervous systems can react really strongly to things. Emotional sensitivity can increase social awareness. And so we might have intense emotions, rejection sensitivity, rapid mood shifts, passionate engagement. So this can be painful sometimes in school, but that emotional intensity can also contribute to higher empathy levels, right? Big passion, charisma, creativity, deep engagement with life, seeing beauty, depth, like instead of the surface level stuff. So it's a really incredible, beautiful thing. And there's so many people, high achievers with ADHD. Richard Branson is a billionaire who's a philanthropist and done amazing things. I mean, I did a call on like famous people with ADHD, I think last month maybe. But Trevor Noah, Simone Biles, Michael Phelps, Will Smith, Michael Jordan, Justin Bieber. It's just, I could just keep going on and on and on and on and on. It's just wild how many highly successful people have ADHD. Those are celebrities. And I'm not even talking about, our emergency care workers or our like people who work in the hospital system. There's performers, there's police. I mean, there's so many things. It's really, really incredible. There's so much things about our brains that are really cool. And there really is a genetic advantage. So again, ADHD is highly genetic. If our traits weren't helpful and asset, they would not have persisted for decades and centuries, because they offer survival advantages. Modern environments in our current society amplify the traits that are hard for us. So the way our world is set up, unless you design it yourself, things are going to feel harder. It's going to feel like more of a disorder because of the society structure. And the same traits can be extraordinary strengths. So again, it's not necessarily a deficit, right? It's a difference. It's a different nervous system. So, we want to understand the evolutionary perspective to change the conversation from what's wrong with me, right? Or why can't I do this? Or why is it easy for them to, what environment is my brain built for? What environment do I need? Does my environment support my brain? Does my home life support my brain? Does my work schedule support my brain? Does my time blocking support my brain? What does that look like? That's when things are going to shift at a high level. Just remember how good you are at other things and how can you shift your environment to support your brain? That's the question I would be asking all the time. How can I support my brain instead of wishing it were different? Well, cool. Well, thank you for being on. This was so fun. So if you do want to, we have a group, ADHDtyler.com. Go there. We have a paid group. It's a monthly membership if you want. There's a 7-day trial. We are building an operations manual out altogether, like an ADHD operations manual. That's every Thursday from 4 to 5. That's what we're doing this week and next week. Following week, we have ADHD specialists and doctors coming on, and we get to ask them about supplements and medicine and everything like that. So that's in our group membership, and that's why I can have those guests. So if you want to do that, ADHDtyler.com, you can check that out. There's all kinds of resources. It's not just that group on there. There's free stuff too. So go check that out. And care about all of you, and we'll see you next time. Have a wonderful Tuesday.